The diagnosis papers trembled in my hands as I watched my husband of 50 years pack his suitcase, his back turned to me as if I were already a ghost. So that's it? My voice barely carried across our bedroom, the room where we'd made love countless times, where we'd whispered dreams, where our children had crawled into our bed during thunderstorms. 50 years together and you're walking out the door 20 minutes after I tell you I'm dying? Robert didn't turn around. His shoulders sunk broad but now slightly stooped with egg stiffened under his expensive golf polo. Margaret, please don't make this harder than it already is. I laughed then, a hollow sound that scraped my throat raw. Harder for who, Robert? For you? I'm the one with stage 4 cancer. I'm the one with 6 months to live. And I'm the one being abandoned for a child barely older than our granddaughter. 6 months earlier, the morning had started like any other Tuesday in our 5-decade marriage. I woke at 6:15, 15 minutes before the alarm, just as I had nearly every day since Robert and I bought this colonial-style house in Oakwood Estates 38 years ago. Pale April sunlight filtered through the same pale blue curtains we'd bought together at Macy's after our silver anniversary. I eased out of bed, careful not to wake Robert, and padded to the bathroom. At 70, my morning routine had expanded to include a small pharmacy of pills for blood pressure, cholesterol, and the arthritis that had begun to stiffen my finger joints. I caught my reflection in the mirror as I swallowed the last tablet. My silver-streaked hair needed touching up at the roots, the lines around my eyes deeper than they'd been last year. But Robert still called me his silver fox when he was in a good mood, and I'd grown comfortable in this aging body that had carried 2 children and survived a lifetime. That morning, I noticed a slight yellowing around my eyes that hadn't been there before. Probably nothing. Stress, perhaps, from planning Timothy's wedding. Our son was finally getting married at 45 to a lovely divorcee with 2 teenage children. The preparations had consumed most of my energy for months. I made coffee and toast, setting Robert's mug on the table beside the sports section of the newspaper, ritual unchanged since the 1970s, despite the fact that he mostly read news on his iPad these days. Old habits. "Morning, Maggie," Robert muttered as he shuffled into the kitchen, already dressed in his golf clothes. Tuesday was always golf day, with the boys, a rotating cast of retired executives and professionals who had been his friends longer than some of our grandchildren had been alive. "You're up early," I commented, setting a plate of buttered toast in front of him. "Tea time moved up?" He nodded, not looking up from his phone. "Dave wants to finish before the heat kicks in." I studied my husband as he scrolled through something on his screen, his silver hair neatly combed to the side, his face still handsome at 72. We'd met when I was 20, and he was 22, a chance encounter at a friend's birthday party, where he'd spilled punch on my new white dress and spent the rest of the night trying to make it up to me. 6 months later, we were engaged. A year after that, married in the Methodist Church, where my parents had exchanged vows 30 years earlier. 50 years, half a century of sharing a bed, a bathroom, a checkbook, of raising children, burying parents, changing careers, and navigating the complex geography of a long marriage. We'd had our storm-shiz brief emotional affair with a coworker in the 80s, my depression after my father's death, the terrible year our daughter Rebecca experimented with drugs in college. But we'd weathered it all, settling into what I thought was a comfortable, if occasionally monotonous, partnership. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons tonight," I reminded him as he stood to leave, his toast half-eaten. "Can't make it," he said, pocketing his phone. "Board meeting for the club foundation. Told you last week." Had he? I couldn't remember. Lately, it seemed like Robert was finding more and more reasons to be away from home in the evenings. Club meetings, charity functions, poker nights with neighbors I barely knew. At first, I'd been happy he was staying active in retirement, finding purpose beyond the corporate job that had defined him for 4 decades. But something felt different lately. He was more distant, checked his phone more often, came to bed later. "I'm having that doctor's appointment this afternoon," I said, following him to the door. "For the stomach pain I've been having? And the weight loss?" Right, he nodded absently, checking his watch. "Text me if it's anything serious." He gave me a quick peck on the cheek, the kind of perfunctory kiss that had long ago replaced the passionate embraces of our youth. Hand was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. I stood in the foyer for a moment, an unexpected emptiness settling over me. Something wasn't right with us. With him. I just couldn't put my finger on what had shifted, or when. I spent the morning cleaning the already clean house and sorting through old photographs for Timothy's wedding slideshow. There we were, Robert and I, on our honeymoon in Niagara Falls in 1973. My hair long and his sideburns even longer. Another from 1978, me hugely pregnant with Timothy. Robert's hand proudly on my belly. Christmas 1985. The four of us in matching sweaters. Rebecca rolling her eyes at 13, while Timothy, 11, beamed with childhood innocence. Our 25th anniversary trip to Hawaii. Robert's retirement party. The birth of our first grandchild. A lifetime contained in cardboard boxes and plastic albums. The stomach pain hit as I was making lunch, a sharp, twisting sensation that made me double over at the kitchen counter. It had been happening more frequently lately, along with unexplained fatigue and a loss of appetite that had melted 15 pounds from my frame in 2 months. Robert had actually complimented me on looking fit, oblivious to the fact that I wasn't trying to lose weight. My doctor's appointment was with Dr. Abrams, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had been my physician for nearly 20 years. She listened carefully as I described my symptoms, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. How long has the pain been occurring, Margaret? 3 months? Maybe 4? It was mild at first. I thought it was just acid reflux. And the weight loss? About 15 pounds since Christmas. I haven't been very hungry. Any changes in bowel habits? Stool color? I felt my face flush slightly, even after all these years, still embarrassed to discuss such things. Yes, actually, lighter colored, and I've been so tired lately. I can barely make it through the day without a nap, which isn't like me at all. Dr. Abrams' fingers paused on her tablet. Any family history of pancreatic issues? Cancer? A cold feeling settled in my stomach, different from the pain. My mother had breast cancer. My maternal grandfather died of colon cancer. Why, do you think? She set down her tablet. I don't want to alarm you, Margaret, but these symptoms concern me. The abdominal pain, weight loss, fatigue, and the changes you've described with your stool could indicate several things, including issues with your pancreas or liver. 2 hours later, I was having blood drawn and being scheduled for an ultrasound and CT scan. By the end of the week, I'd had more tests than I could keep track of, culminating in a biopsy that confirmed what Dr. Abrams had suspected from the beginning. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, already metastasized to my liver and lungs. I sat alone in Dr. Abrams' office as she gently explained my options, sir. Rather, my lack of them. Chemotherapy might buy me time, make me more comfortable, but it wouldn't save my life. 6 months, she estimated. Perhaps a bit more with aggressive treatment, but the quality of that extended time was questionable. I'm so sorry, Margaret, she said, reaching across her desk to squeeze my hand. Would you like me to call someone for you? Your husband? Your children? I shook my head, still processing. No, I need to tell them myself, especially Robert. Of course, she hesitated. This is a tremendous shock. I'd like to refer you to a therapist who specializes in helping patients navigate terminal diagnoses. And there are support groups. I'll be fine, I interrupted, more sharply than I intended. I just need some time to process this. But as I drove home, the reality of my situation began to sink in. 6 months, half a year, I would never see another Christmas, would barely see autumn, wouldn't be at Rebecca's 40th birthday next February, would miss seeing my youngest grandchild start kindergarten. And Robert, my partner of 50 years, how would he cope? Despite our recent distance, despite the monotony that had settled into our marriage like dust on unused furniture, I couldn't imagine him navigating life without me. We were a matched set, like the salt and pepper shakers our daughter had given us for our anniversary. Mom and Dad was practically one word to our children and grandchildren. I decided not to tell him right away. Timothy's wedding was in 3 weeks, and I didn't want to cast a shadow over the celebration. I would wait until after, then sit Robert down and break the news gently. We would face this together, as we had faced everything else in our 5 decades together. But that evening, as I prepared for the dinner he'd forgotten about, I noticed something odd. Robert had left his iPad on the kitchen counter, something he never did, and a notification appeared on the screen. A text message from someone named A with a heart emoji beside it. Still thinking about last night, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time? I stared at the message, blood rushing in my ears. It could be innocent. It could be about golf, or some surprise he was planning for me, but deep down, I knew. The late nights, the distraction, the way he'd stopped kissing me properly, stopped reaching for me in bed, the cologne I didn't recognize, the sudden interest in his appearance after years of comfortable indifference. My hands trembled as I picked up the iPad. Robert's password had been the same for years. Our anniversary date. The device unlocked immediately. The text thread with A loaded, revealing months of messages. Flirtatious at first, then increasingly explicit. Photos I couldn't bear to look at. Plans for meetups at hotels, at her apartment. Declarations of passion that Robert hadn't expressed to me in decades. She makes me feel young again. Makes me feel alive. When are you going to leave her, you promised? I know it's complicated. 50 years is a long time. But we're wasting time we could be spending together. Her name was Amber. She worked at the country club where Robert played golf. She was 24 years old, younger than our oldest grandchild. And my husband of 50 years was having an affair with her. I set the iPad down carefully, as if it might explode. Then I walked to the bathroom and vomited until nothing was left but bitter bile. My abdomen screaming with the pain of my newly diagnosed cancer. For 3 weeks, I said nothing. I attended Timothy's wedding with a smile plastered on my face, danced with Robert as guests cooed over the amazing couple still so in love after all these years, and pretended I wasn't dying inside in more ways than one. I watched Robert like a hawk, noting how he checked his phone when he thought no one was looking, how he disappeared for 45 minutes during the reception and returned with his hair slightly mussed. I saw him charming the young female bartender, and recognized the same predatory interest I'd once mistaken for charisma when I was 20 and impressionable. The day after we returned from the wedding weekend, my mother had a massive stroke. For the next month, I practically lived at the hospital and then the hospice facility, holding her hand as she slipped away. Robert visited exactly twice, claiming work commitments with his various boards and charities. At her funeral, he stood beside me, playing the dutiful husband, his hand resting on the small of my back in a gesture that once brought comfort but now made my skin crawl with its hypocrisy. "You've lost more weight," my sister Catherine commented at the reception afterward. "Are you feeling okay? You look different." "Just stress," I lied, the cancer diagnosis still my secret. Between Mom and Timothy's wedding, it's been a lot. "And how are things with Robert?" she asked, her eyes tracking him across the room as he charmed a group of my cousins. "You two seem a little." "We're fine," I said quickly. 50 years, you know. We have our rhythms." But we weren't fine, and I wasn't fine. The pain was getting worse, and I'd started waking up drenched in night sweats. Twice. Robert had opted to sleep in the guest room, claiming my restlessness kept him awake. In reality, I suspected he was texting with Amber, maybe even sneaking out to see her after I fell into my medication-induced sleep. It was time. Time to tell him about the cancer. Time to confront him about the affair. Time to determine what our 50 years actually meant when faced with mortality and betrayal. I chose a Tuesday morning in early June. Robert didn't have golf scheduled, and I'd asked our cleaning lady not to come. The house was quiet, the kind of heavy silence that precedes life-altering conversations. The morning light filtered through our bedroom curtains as I sat on the edge of our bed, the doctor's most recent report confirming the cancer had progressed despite the preliminary treatment trembling in my hands. 6 months, maybe less now. My fingers clenched the paper, crinkling the edges. "Robert," I called out, my voice steadier than I expected. "Can you come in here? We need to talk." He appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his golf clothes, despite having told me he was free today. Keys jingled in his hand. At 72, he still had that same confident stance, his silver hair neatly combed to the side. For 50 years, I'd woken up to that face, through children, grandchildren, job losses, and retirement. Margaret, can it wait? Dave called there was a cancellation at the course, so we're going to grab an early tea time. I looked up at him, at the impatience in his eyes, and something inside me hardened. The cancer, the affair, the Lies-It, all crystallized into a moment of clarity. No, it can't wait. Sit down, please. He sighed dramatically but took a seat on the armchair across from me. I handed him the papers without preamble. What's this? He asked, squinting as he scanned the first page. It's cancer, Robert, terminal, pancreatic, spread to my liver and lungs. The doctor gave me 6 months. I watched his face closely, waiting for the shock, the grief, the moment when he would take me in his arms, like he had when we lost our first baby all those years ago. Instead, his expression went blank, like a curtain being drawn. Are you sure? His voice was flat. Yes. 3 different opinions. I've known since before Timothy's wedding. I didn't want to ruin his day. I paused, watching for any reaction. The pain I've been having, the weight loss that's advanced. They can try chemo, but it won't. I can't do this. He stood up suddenly, cutting me off. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. What? I can't watch you die, Margaret. He paced to the window, his back to me. I've been meaning to tell you. I've met someone. The room seemed to tilt, though I'd been expecting this confession for weeks. Hearing it out loud, in this moment, was still a physical blow. You've what? Her name is Amber. She works at the country club. She's 24. A laugh escaped me, high and unnatural. Is this a joke? Some twisted way of making me forget about the cancer? He turned to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before, a cowardice, a desperation. I've been seeing her for 6 months. I was going to tell you, but then there was Timothy's wedding, and then your mother's funeral. 6 months? I whispered, though I already knew this from his messages. You're leaving me for a girl younger than our granddaughter? She makes me feel alive again, Margaret. His voice took on a defensive edge. Do you know how long it's been since you looked at me that way? Since we did anything spontaneous? Since you didn't fall asleep at 8 o'clock every night? I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me, the cancer diagnosis papers fluttering to the floor. I'm dying, Robert. I just told you I'm dying, and you're talking about feeling alive? He had the decency to look momentarily ashamed, but it passed quickly. He grabbed his wallet from the dresser. I've already packed some things. I'll come back for the rest later. You're leaving? Right now? The room was spinning, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. I just told you I have terminal cancer, and you're walking out the door to be with your child girlfriend? She's not a child, Margaret. She's an adult. She's 50 years younger than you. And she doesn't make me feel old, or trapped, or like I'm just waiting around to die. The cruelty of his words landed like physical blows. I'm sorry about your diagnosis. Truly, I am. But I can't do this. I can't watch another person I love waste away like my father did. I'm not strong enough. Like your father? I repeated incredulously. Your father had Alzheimer's for 12 years, and your mother cared for him every single day until he died. She never once considered leaving. Well, I'm not my mother. He grabbed his car keys. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the finances. You'll be taken care of course. Oh, how generous of you. Paying for your dying wife's care while you run off with a girl young enough to be your granddaughter. This isn't productive, he said coldly. I'll come back when you're calmer. Don't bother, I spat. If you walk out that door right now, don't ever come back. For a moment, I thought I saw hesitation in his eyes. 50 years of memories, of shared history, seemed to pass between us. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket, and his expression hardened. I'm sorry, Margaret, for everything. And just like that, he walked out. No embrace, no tears, no backward glance. Just the soft click of our front door, the one we'd painted together every 5 years for 5 decades, and the sound of his car starting in the driveway. I sank back onto the bed, the diagnosis papers scattered around me like fallen leaves, and finally allowed myself to weep not for the cancer eating away at my body, but for the 50 years that had apparently meant nothing to the man I'd built my life around. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of shock and grief. I didn't call our children right away, couldn't bear to compound the news of my illness with their father's betrayal. Instead, I moved through the house like a ghost, touching objects that held memories. The coffee mug I'd bought Robert on our trip to Ireland for our 40th anniversary. The framed photo from our vow renewal at 25 years. The quilt his mother had made for us as a wedding gift, now worn thin with age and use. Half a century of marriage, erased in a 20-minute conversation. I tried to eat but couldn't keep anything down. The cancer pain mingled with the emotional agony until I couldn't distinguish between them. I took one of the prescription painkillers Dr. Abrams had given me and fell into a fitful sleep on the sofa, unable to face our empty bed. When I woke, darkness had fallen. I checked my phone. 9:48 p.m. No calls from Robert, no texts. Just a missed call from Rebecca and one from Dr. Abrams' office, probably following up on my last appointment. I was contemplating whether to return Rebecca's call when my phone buzzed with a new text message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry you're going through this, but thank you for setting him free. We're flying to Cancun tonight. I'll take good care of him, Amber." I stared at the message, reading and rereading it, my mind struggling to process the breathtaking cruelty. Not just from this girl I'd never met, but from Robert, who must have told her about my cancer, about our confrontation. Who was, at this very moment, preparing to jet off to Mexico with his young mistress, while his wife of 50 years faced death alone. Rage-pure cleansing rages surged through me. I threw my phone against the wall so hard it shattered, just like everything else in my life. Then I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I screamed. A primal, guttural howl of pain and fury that seemed to come from some deep, wounded part of me I hadn't known existed. I screamed until my throat was raw, until the neighbor's porch light flicked on, until I tasted blood. When I finally stopped, the silence of the house pressed in around me, but something had shifted. The shock was receding, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. I would not let Robert destroy what remained of my life. I would not spend my final months grieving for a man who had thrown away 50 years of marriage for a fling with a woman who wasn't even born when we celebrated our 25th anniversary. I made my way to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. A thin, pale woman with silver-streaked hair looked back at me, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. I barely recognized myself, not just because of the weight loss from the cancer, but because somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of the strong, independent woman I'd been before I became simply Robert's wife. It was time to find her again, even if I didn't have much time left. The next morning, I forced myself to eat a piece of toast and drink some tea before calling my children. Timothy answered on the second ring. "Mom, I was just about to call you. Melissa and I wanted to thank you again for everything you did for the wedding. It was perfect." His happiness made what I had to say even harder. "Tim, honey, I need to tell you something. 2 things, actually, and they're both difficult." There was a pause. "Mom, what's wrong? Is it Dad?" "Yes and no." I took a deep breath. "Your father left me yesterday. He's been having an affair with a young woman from the country club. Her name is Amber. She's 24. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Timothy spoke, his voice strangled. "He what?" "There's more," I continued, forcing the words out. "I have cancer, Tim, pancreatic, stage 4. I found out before your wedding but didn't want to ruin your day. The doctors say I have about 6 months." This time, the silence was broken by a choked sob. "Mom, no, no. I'm so sorry to dump all this on you at once," I whispered, my own tears starting again. "But I need you to hear it from me, not from him or anyone else." "I'll be there in 3 hours," he said immediately. "I'm getting in the car right now." No, honey, you're still on your honeymoon, you can't. Watch me. He cut in, his voice hard. My father abandoned my dying mother. There is nothing more important than being with you right now. After I hung up, I made the same call to Rebecca, who reacted with equal parts shock and fury. By noon, both of my children had booked flights home, despite my protests that they had their own lives and responsibilities. You've been there for every crisis in my life, Rebecca said firmly. Every breakup, every job loss, every time the kids were sick. It's our turn to be there for you. Their loyalty both comforted and devastated me. They shouldn't have to deal with this, their father's betrayal, their mother's imminent death. They should be living their lives, raising their families, pursuing their careers, not flying home to pick up the pieces of their parents' shattered marriage while simultaneously preparing to lose a parent to cancer. But selfishly, I was glad they were coming. The thought of facing the next steps alone was overwhelming. That afternoon, I forced myself to make practical arrangements. I called our family doctor, who recommended a therapist specializing in both grief and terminal illness. I contacted Dr. Abrams to schedule the chemotherapy she'd suggested might extend my life by a few precious months. I looked into support groups for cancer patients at the local hospital, and I called a lawyer. Gloria Chen was reputed to be the most formidable divorce attorney in the state. She agreed to see me the following day as an emergency consult after I briefly explained my situation. Abandonment during terminal illness, she said, her voice crisp and professional. Plus adultery with a much younger woman. Mrs. Winters, your husband has made some very poor choices from a legal perspective. That night, as I sat alone in the home Robert and I had shared for nearly 4 decades, I tried to make sense of how my life had imploded so completely in just 24 hours. But there was no sense to be made, no logical explanation that would soothe the jagged edges of this dual betrayal by my body and by my husband. I slept fitfully, waking every hour to the phantom sound of Robert's key in the door, his footsteps on the stairs. But he didn't come home. According to his mistress's text, he was in Cancun, presumably sipping margaritas on a beach while I lay alone in our marriage bed, contemplating my mortality. In the darkness before dawn, a strange calm settled over me. If these were to be my last months on earth, I would not spend them weeping for a man who had thrown away our life together when I needed him most. I would not allow Robert's betrayal to define my final chapter. Timothy arrived the next morning, his face haggard from a night of travel and shock. He dropped his suitcase in the foyer and enveloped me in a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. For everything." I patted his back, struck by the role reversal. My 6'2" son, who had once been a tiny baby nestled against my chest, was now trying to protect me from the cruelties of the world. "It's not your fault," I assured him, guiding him to the kitchen. "None of this is your fault." Rebecca arrived that evening with her husband Mark and their 2 children, Emma, 8, and Jack, 13. They'd booked a suite at a nearby hotel but insisted on spending the day with me at the house. "Where's Grandpa?" Emma asked innocently as she climbed onto my lap. "Is he at golf?" Rebecca and I exchanged glances over her head. "Grandpa is on a trip," I said carefully. "He'll be away for a while." "Is it because you're sick?" she asked, her small fingers touching my face with surprising gentleness. "Mommy said you're not feeling well. How do you explain cancer and betrayal to an 8-year-old? "Yes, sweetie, I am sick. But I'm going to fight very hard to get better, and having you here makes me feel stronger already." Later, after the children were settled in front of a movie, Rebecca, Timothy, Mark, and I gathered in the kitchen to discuss the situation. I told them everything, the timing of my diagnosis, Robert's affair, his callous departure, even the text from Amber. "I'm going to kill him," Timothy said flatly. "My own father. I'm going to find him and kill him." "Get in line," Rebecca muttered, her hands clenched into fists on the kitchen table. "How could he do this? 50 years of marriage and he walks out the day you tell him you're dying? What kind of monster?" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "You're not going to kill him or confront him or do anything that will cause you pain or trouble. This is between your father and me." "But Mom." "No, Timothy, I mean it. I won't have what time I have left poisoned by anger and vengeance. I reached for both of their hands. I need you to promise me something. Both of you. They nodded reluctantly. Promise me you won't let your father's actions destroy your own capacity for love and trust. What he did was unforgivable, but it reflects on him, not on you, and not on marriage or commitment or love itself. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. How are you so strong? If Mark did this to me, I'd be homicidal. I smiled sadly. I don't have the luxury of time for anger. 6 months goes by very quickly. What can we do? Timothy asked, his voice thick with emotion. Chapter 2. The Return. 3 months passed in a blur of doctor's appointments, chemo sessions, and hushed phone calls with my children who wanted to murder their father. I'd lost 30 pounds, most of my hair, and any illusion I'd had about the sanctity of marriage. What I hadn't lost was my dignity or my resolve. The day after Robert left, I'd called my best friend Diane, a real estate agent who'd been divorced twice. Sell everything, I told her. The golf clubs, his precious car collection, all of it, and find me a buyer for the house. Margaret, she'd said carefully, you might want to consult a lawyer first. But I already had. By noon the next day, I was sitting across from Linda Chen, the most cutthroat divorce attorney in the state. Fortunately for you, she'd said, reviewing our financial documents. Your husband made a critical error. In your state, abandonment combined with adultery gives us significant leverage, especially given your medical condition. And since he's flaunting his new relationship so publicly, she'd shown me the Facebook photos of Robert and Amber in Cancun, his arm around her waist as they posed on the very beach where we'd spent our 40th anniversary. By the end of the week, Robert's prized vintage Corvette was sold to a collector in Phoenix. The golf clubs he'd spent thousands on were listed on eBay. The vacation home in Florida was already in escrow. And our family home, the one he'd promised would always be ours, was emptied of everything that reminded me of him. I used some of the money to rent a small but elegant apartment near my daughter's family. The rest I divided into 3 piles. One for practical matters like medical bills, one for the future needs of my children and grandchildren, and one for what I called my living funeral. If I only had months to live, I wasn't going to spend them crying over a man who couldn't face mortality. I went to Paris, a city Robert had always refused to visit because he didn't like the French. I took my granddaughter to New York to see Broadway shows. I hired a personal chef to teach me how to make all the complicated dishes I'd never had time to learn. The chemo was brutal, but something strange happened along the way. A new scan showed the tumor shrinking, not growing. It's not a cure, my oncologist cautioned, but it's buying us time, maybe significantly more than we thought. I didn't tell Robert. He hadn't called once to check on me. Then, exactly 3 months after he'd walked out, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My daughter had taken the kids to soccer practice, and my next chemo session wasn't until Monday. When I opened the door, there stood Robert, tanned from his Mexican getaway, but somehow smaller than I remembered, diminished. Margaret, he said, his voice breaking. Can I come in? I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He entered hesitantly, looking around at the unfamiliar space. Where's all our furniture? He asked. Sold, or given away. My voice was calm. What do you want, Robert? He sank onto the single armchair, a new one I'd bought because it was perfect for reading. Amber left me, for her ex-boyfriend. She'd been texting him the entire time we were together. He gave a hollow laugh. Karma, I guess. I suppose. I remained standing. Is that why you're here? Your child bride dumped you so you thought you'd come back to your dying wife? Noel, partially. He ran his hands through his hair. I made a terrible mistake, Margaret, the worst mistake of my life. I was scared and selfish and… Save it, I cut him off. You don't get to ease your conscience at my expense. He looked up then, really seeing me for the first time. Your hair. Self-consciously, I touched the short silver pixie cut that had grown back after the first rounds of chemo. Yes, well, cancer treatments tend to do that. How are you? The treatments, are they? He couldn't finish the sentence. They're working better than expected, I said. The doctor thinks I might have a year or more now. His face lit up with something like hope. That's wonderful news. Maybe we could. No, I said firmly. There is no we anymore, Robert. That's when his gaze shifted to my living room, really taking it in for the first time. The walls, once covered with family photos, now displayed artwork I'd bought from local galleries. Where his recliner used to sit was now a small writing desk, and all around the room, scattered on every surface, were stacks of sealed envelopes. What are all these? He asked, reaching for one. Letters, I said, from everyone you hurt when you left. Our children, our grandchildren, our friends, even your own brother. He picked up one envelope, then another, reading the names I'd written on each one. Timothy, Rebecca, little Emma, only 8 years old, Pastor Jim, his golfing buddies, the neighbors we'd had Christmas dinner with for 20 years. I don't understand, he whispered. I asked everyone to write down exactly how they felt when you abandoned all of you in my darkest hour, what they wanted to say to you but couldn't because you disappeared. I told them I'd make sure you got their letters eventually. His hands trembled as he held our youngest granddaughter's envelope. Margaret, please. You know what the strangest part is? I continued, my voice steady. When I told them all I was collecting these letters for you, not one person wrote about how much they missed you, or how they hoped you'd come back. Not one, Robert. They wrote about betrayal, about cowardice, about how you taught them what love isn't. He fell to his knees then, the letters scattering around him, and began to sob deep, guttural sounds that seemed to come from some broken place I no longer recognized. I was a coward, he choked out between sobs. I couldn't face losing you. I couldn't face my own mortality, so I ran to someone who made me feel young again, but it was all a lie. I stood over him, this stranger I'd shared a bed with for half a century, and felt nothing but a distant pity. You can take the letters with you when you go, I said quietly. Read them or burn them, it doesn't matter to me. Your lawyer can contact mine about the divorce proceedings. He looked up, his face streaked with tears. You're really going through with the divorce? It was finalized last week, I said. You never responded to the papers. That's when he saw it, the small group photo on my mantle. Me, surrounded by my cancer support group after we'd finished a 5K walk for research funding. My arm was linked with a silver-haired man about our age, both of us laughing at something off camera. Who's that? Robert asked, his voice hollow. That's Richard. His wife died of breast cancer 3 years ago. He volunteers at the cancer center now, driving patients to their appointments. He's been driving me since the week after you left. I paused. He knows what it means to stay. Robert stared at the photo, then back at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're seeing him? We have dinner sometimes. He makes me laugh. He's not afraid of what's coming. I moved toward the door. I think you should go now. Margaret, please, he begged, still on his knees. 50 years has to count for something. Give me another chance. Let me take care of you. I looked at him one last time, this man I'd loved since I was 22 years old. You had your chance, Robert. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. You chose worse. You chose sickness. You chose to walk out that door. I opened the front door. Now I'm choosing to close it. As he shuffled past me, broken and diminished, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. The cancer might still take my life, if not in 6 months, then perhaps in a year or two. But Robert had already taken my past. I wouldn't let him take whatever future I had left. I closed the door softly behind him, turned the lock, and went to call Richard to see if he wanted to try that new Italian restaurant downtown. The letters remained scattered on my floor, their purpose served. They had never been meant for Robert to read. They had been my therapy, my way of showing myself that I wasn't alone, even when the person who had promised to stand beside me forever had failed to keep that promise. Tomorrow, I would gather them up and burn them in the small fire pit on my patio. Their weight had served their purpose. Like the cancer in my body, they might never fully disappear, but I wouldn't let them define the time I had left. 2 years to the day after Robert walked out, I stood in my garden, pinning photographs to a clothesline strung between two trees. It was a display I'd been working on for weeks, a visual memoir of my life. Not just the 50 years with Robert, but all of it. My childhood, my college years, my early career as a teacher, my children's births and milestones. And now, these new chapters: Paris, Richard, survivorship. The garden party had been Timothy's idea celebration of life, of survival, of new beginnings. Everyone was coming, both my children and their families, friends who had supported me through the darkest days, members of my cancer support group, even James and his wife from Arizona, and Robert. It had been my decision to invite him. He was part of my story, had been for most of my life, and I wanted him to see that the story continued, beautiful and complex, even after his chapter had closed. He had accepted with surprise and gratitude, promising to keep his distance if that's what I preferred. As I hung the last photograph, a recent one of Richard and me in front of Notre Dame, laughing at something beyond the frame, I heard a car pull up outside. Richard emerged from the house, where he'd been arranging platters of food. "Ready?" he asked, coming to stand beside me. I looked at the clothesline of photographs me life displayed in images spanning 7 decades and nodded. "Ready." The garden filled quickly with guests. Emma and Jack darted between groups of adults, showing off the fairy lights they'd helped string in the trees. Timothy and Melissa arrived with their 3-month-old son, named James after his great-uncle. Rebecca and Mark brought champagne and hugs. Friends from every period of my life mingled on the patio, exclaiming over the photograph display, filling my small sanctuary with laughter and love. Robert arrived last, standing uncertainly at the garden gate until I noticed him and waved him in. He looked better than he had in the hospital, healthier. His color returned, though he moved with the caution of someone still recovering. He carried a small gift bag, reminiscent of the bird feeder he'd brought months earlier. "Thank you for including me," he said quietly as he joined me by the refreshment table. "It means more than you know." "You're part of this story," I said, gesturing to the photographs. "A big part, that doesn't change." He nodded, his eyes moving from image to image along the clothesline. "You've created something beautiful here. Not just the party, but your life." "We created much of it together," I acknowledged. "The good parts, our children, our home, those years when we were truly partners, those don't disappear because of how it ended." Robert's gaze settled on Richard, who was chatting with James across the garden. "He seems like a good man." "He is." I felt no need to elaborate, to explain the depth of connection I'd found with Richard, or to assuage any jealousy Robert might feel. That part of our relationship where I managed his emotions, smoothed his path, was over. "I brought you something," Robert said, offering the gift bag. "A sort of anniversary gift, I suppose. 2 years since." He didn't finish the sentence. Inside the bag was a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate patterns. I recognized it immediately, jewelry box he'd bought me in Santa Fe on our 30th anniversary trip. I'd left it behind when I moved out of our house, unable to bear the memories it contained. "Open it," he urged. Inside were my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones I'd worn on our wedding day, the ones I'd assumed had been sold with everything else when I'd instructed Diane to liquidate our possessions. "I took them before I left," Robert admitted. "Not to keep from you, but because they were always my favorite. You wearing those pearls on our wedding day is one of my clearest memories. I kept them as a reminder of what I'd thrown away." He swallowed hard. "They belong with you, Margaret. With your story." I closed the box gently, unexpectedly moved by this gesture. "Thank you, Robert." A commotion near the house drew our attention. Timothy, tapping a spoon against a champagne glass, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could have everyone gather around," he announced. "It's time for the toast." Guests congregated on the patio as Richard appeared beside me, slipping his arm around my waist with easy affection. Robert stepped back, giving us space, but remained nearby as Timothy raised his glass. "2 years ago today," my son began, his voice strong and clear, "our family faced the unimaginable mom's cancer diagnosis and the end of what we thought was an unshakable marriage. It felt like the world was ending. But standing here today, He looked around the garden at the friends and family gathered, at me standing between my ex-husband and my new partner, at his own infant son sleeping in Melissa's arms. Standing here today, I'm reminded that endings aren't the whole story. Sometimes they're just the beginning of something we couldn't have imagined. Rebecca stepped forward to join her brother. "To Mom," she said, raising her glass, "who taught us how to weather storms with grace, who showed us that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, but about finding beauty even in the breaking." "To Margaret," Richard added, his arm tightening around me, "who faced the darkest night with unfathomable courage and emerged into a dawn more beautiful for the darkness that preceded it." "To Margaret," Robert echoed softly, raising his own glass, "who deserved better but created it for herself anyway." As glasses clinked around us and conversations resumed, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending I hope to have many more years, more adventures, more love to give and receive, but a circle closing, a pattern revealing itself in what had once seemed like random devastation. The letters I'd collected and then burned had served their purpose. The cancer that had threatened to define my final chapter had instead become just one thread in a much richer tapestry. The betrayal that had nearly broken me had ultimately freed me to discover strengths I'd forgotten I possessed. Later, as twilight settled over the garden and fairy lights twinkled in the trees, I stood beside the clothesline of photographs, studying the visual record of my life. There I was as a baby in my mother's arms, as a young bride, pearls at my ears, gazing adoringly at Robert, holding Timothy, then Rebecca, on their birthdays, standing proudly at my last day of teaching before retirement, pale but determined during chemo, radiant in Paris, peaceful in Richard's embrace. A complete life, a beautiful life. Not in spite of its sorrows and betrayals, but because of how I'd moved through them, integrated them, allowed them to reshape but not destroy me. Emma appeared at my side, slipping her small hand into mine. "Grandma," she said, looking up at me with those clear, innocent eyes, "are you happy now, even with everything that happened?" I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm very happy. And do you know why?" She shook her head, waiting. "Because I learned that happiness isn't something we find, it's something we make over and over, out of whatever life gives us, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts." She considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to philosophical questions. Like when you make a mistake in art class, but then turn it into something even better? I laughed, delighted by her perfect metaphor. "Exactly like that, Emma, exactly like that." As night fell completely, guests began to depart first, those with young children, then the older friends, who tired easily. Eventually, only the core remained. My children and their spouses, Richard, and, somewhat surprisingly, Robert, who had found unexpected common ground with Richard over their shared love of baseball. We sat around the patio table, warmed by the small fire pit, sharing stories and memories, some from the 50 years Robert and I had shared, others from the new life I was building. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just the comfortable acknowledgement that life was complex, relationships evolved, and love, in its many forms, remained the constant thread. When Robert finally rose to leave, he paused beside my chair. "Thank you," he said simply, "for today. For the invitation back into the family, even at the edges. For teaching our children forgiveness without forgetting. For showing me what real strength looks like." I reached up to briefly touch his hand, not with the intimacy of a lover or the automatic gesture of a wife, but with the compassion of someone who had once known him better than anyone, and who still, despite everything, wished him well. "Goodbye, Robert," I said softly. As he walked toward the garden gate, I noticed for the first time that his shoulders seemed straighter, his step lighter. He had come seeking absolution and had found something more valuable, the chance to face his mistakes honestly and begin to make amends. Richard moved to the chair beside me as Robert's car pulled away. "Okay?" he asked, his simple question encompassing all the complex emotions of the day. "More than okay," I assured him, leaning against his solid warmth. "I feel complete." Like all the pieces of my life finally make sense, even the broken ones. Later, after everyone had gone and the garden was quiet again, Richard and I sat alone by the dying fire. Above us, stars punctured the darkness, countless lights in the vast night, like moments of joy in a universe of possibility. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing my upturned gaze. "I'm thinking about time," I said truthfully. "How we never know how much we have, how that uncertainty can terrify us, like it terrified Robert, or free us to truly live each moment as it comes." "And which does it do for you?" His question was gentle, curious. I smiled, reaching for his hand. "It reminds me to say the important things now, to live authentically now, to love deeply now." I turned to face him fully. "I love you, Richard. Not as a replacement for what I lost, but as something entirely new and precious." His eyes, reflecting the firelight, filled with emotion. "And I love you, Margaret. Not in spite of all you've been through, but because of the woman it's shaped you to be." We sat in comfortable silence then, watching the embers glow and fade in the fire, a reminder that even endings held their own unique beauty, their own gentle light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to choose courage over fear, growth over stagnation, life over mere existence. My body might harbor dormant cancer cells that could reactivate. Old grief might occasionally resurface. But I knew now that I could face whatever came, not because I was exceptionally strong, but because I had learned that strength isn't the absence of weakness, but the willingness to keep moving forward despite it. When Robert walked out 3 years earlier, leaving me with a terminal diagnosis and a shattered heart, I thought my story was ending. Instead, it was just beginning a new chapter I was writing myself, line by line, choice by choice, day by day. And that, perhaps, was the greatest surprise of all. That at 73, after a half-century defining myself primarily as someone's wife, I had discovered that I was, and always had been, the author of my own life. The pen had always been in my hand. I had merely forgotten how to use it. Now I remembered. And the story I was writing with Richard, with my children and grandchildren, with friends old and new, was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined in those dark days after Robert's betrayal. It wasn't a fairy tale. It contained pain alongside joy, loss alongside discovery, endings alongside beginnings. But it was authentic. It was mine. And in the soft light of the dying fire, with Richard's hand warm in mine and the future stretching before us like an unwritten page, that seemed like the happiest ending, or, rather, the happiest continuing I could possibly desire. If you're enjoying this story, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share with someone who appreciates emotional real-life stories.